Hi, everybody. It's so nice to virtually have you here with us today. So, I want to talk today about the fact that you think your team is totally fine, and I hope that's true. But I'm going to give you some pointers in order to have you check in on a regular basis to make sure your people are fine. It's really hard to tell when they're working remotely, especially if they were in the office previously and were kind of forced had their hand forced to being a remote worker based on the pandemic. So talking about myself, Becca gave me a wonderful introduction. I appreciate that. Just to say a little bit more about why I'm here, I do consulting. So I work with a variety of companies in a variety of industries, and I do HR projects across the board. So something that's very important to me is engagement. And so I'm always working with my clients on how, making sure they always have a pulse on their employee engagement. Well, everything got flipped on its head about a year ago, as you're all aware. And all of a sudden, everybody was forced to work from home. So how did we maintain and how did I coach people through? It was a really big challenge for me, but I've learned some things along the way. So that's why I'm here to talk to you today. Okay, so that's me. Hi, everybody. This was me last March, as I'm sure it was a lot of you, where all of a sudden our work changed. I had been on site a lot. All of a sudden I was not on client sites anymore. They were struggling, trying to find a way to have their people work remotely. So a lot of their people were kind of suffering through, and they weren't aware of that because all of a sudden they didn't see their faces in the office. So it was really hard to see how they were doing. My colleagues had no idea this is how I felt either until we started doing a weekly Zoom call once the pandemic started and everything shut down. I find it very, very important, and I'm going to talk about that a little bit later on. But when you can't see people's faces, you can't see how they feel. So it's really important to connect with people on a regular basis that way. And one of the ways that we can make sure that our people are being successful, even if they're forced to be remote when they're not usually remote, is by really dictating the expectations for success. So how do we set that street for them or set that path for them so that regardless of what's going on in their lives, they can still be successful? And I think especially during a pandemic and when we're forced to be home, this is even more important than it would be on a regular basis when everybody can see each other and communicate and connect, or that managers can coach in person on a regular basis. So setting up this path for success is really important. So I'm going to talk about some tips that might help you to be able to do this. And the first one and the biggest thing is communication. And so I've witnessed managers who really were not great communicators in the past, even in person, become even better communicators now that they've had to do so to make sure that their people are okay, to make sure everybody's on the same path for success. And so when we talk about communication, I'm talking about a variety of things. So clarity is really, really important, especially when you can't be face to face. Oftentimes, people will send a text or an email. Those leave a lot of space for misinterpretation. Sometimes people think that they're being reprimanded, but they're really not. And so it's really important to connect and be very, very clear in your communication and very open. And so whether that's quick daily stand-up meetings with your people, or if it's a weekly meeting, whatever works for you and your people, but you have to be aware of what works for them. So sometimes you have to ask. And so that's part of the communication process, always being open, being honest. It can be, communicating in person, online, whatever you're able to do at this present time. But if they're working remotely, online is great. And I mean, so many things have popped up, or maybe they were there already and I wasn't aware, but a lot of tools have popped up to allow this to be successful with remote learning or remote work, sorry. So another thing that you need to communicate, which I've found very, very important over the last year, is the communication of your flexibility as a manager. What are you willing to change in regards to ways of work for your people that will allow them to be successful regardless of all of the changes that are going on in their lives? And so it's really important to be clear on what you're flexible in doing, whether it's hours of work, how they're doing their work, who's involved in their work. Are they willing to, or are you willing to allow them to pass things over to somebody else if necessary? Can they work as a team? You really have to communicate what you're flexible in and what you're inflexible in as well. So when you're communicating with people, the one thing I said was really important is talking to people, right? Asking questions. But then you also have to listen. So when somebody comes forward and they talk to you about something, it used to be, you're in person and they would talk to you about something, and it really was okay for you to have that conversation person to person. A lot of times I'm finding remotely managers are, if they're not using these kinds of tools where they can see each other's faces, they're missing out on the being able to listen to understand because they can't see their people. And so when you have a team that's working together on a regular basis, 5 days a week, and then all of a sudden they're not together anymore, you really have to use those listening skills. It's very, very important. So when you're listening to understand, one thing you need to do is check in often. Whether it's a quick email, a quick video chat, just to check in, let your people know that you care, right? So when you're checking in with them, when you ask, how are you doing? Listen to their response. I know in our culture, it's very easy to say, hey, how's it going? And then move on to something else. But in this time when there's a pandemic and people are in, a higher state of anxiety or a higher state of stress for certain reasons, whether it's all of a sudden they're, forced to be at home, their kids are doing homeschool, they've got pets barking in the background, which hopefully mine won't do that during this presentation. It's really important to listen to their responses. So are they telling you without really telling you that they're burned out? It's been a long year. It's been a year of so many changes where we're suddenly thrown into these massive amounts of change all at one time. Are they frustrated? Are they not able to use the tools properly? Really listen to, how they're feeling on a daily basis. A lot of times there's exhaustion. I know at the beginning when my children were thrown into online school, my son's teacher didn't understand technology. So I spent a ton of my time trying to help my son to accomplish things online, but also speaking to his teacher, trying to help his teacher learn the system. So there was a lot of exhaustion and frustration on my part, as well as trying to do my work, which included helping my clients suddenly deal with a pandemic. So there was a lot of that in there. And so, like I said before, we started these weekly Zoom calls with myself and my colleagues, and it was really beneficial. We were able to talk about those exhaustions and the frustrations and help each other through that. And then the last thing for that is ask what you can do to help them through. So one thing that at the very beginning, I had a lot of managers who were kind of hardcore, right? They wanted their people in the office all the time. There was no exception. There was no remote work. They didn't have any flexibility with that. If, they had to stay home because a child was sick, I had some managers who would be upset with that. So I think it's really important to talk about understanding and empathy. Okay, during these times especially. So get to know what their situations are and be okay with it. And it's really important, the be okay with it part, because there's really not a lot we can do about that right now. So if people have, their kids at home and they're on meetings and their kids are popping their heads in to the meetings, you have to be okay with it. Okay, it's really, really important. And I'd like to bring you back, and I'm sure some of you have seen this, but about 3 or 4 years ago, before remote work was, very common. I mean, pre-pandemic, let's say, there was a news reporter who was, dressed very professionally in his office at his home, saying his news report, and his kids burst in through the door, and his daughter sat beside him and knocked a thing of books over, and then his younger child came in the walker, and then the wife slid in the room and took them out. And when I think about it now, I think it's hilarious because this is common day. And so, it's funny, back then it was such a big thing. Everybody reacted to it and said, oh my gosh, that's unprofessional. But nowadays it's very, very common. I'm on calls with people when this happens on a regular basis, whether it's kids or cats walking across the screen or, a dog barking, all of those things. It's important to let your people know, you understand they can't change it, and you're very flexible with that. Although there are still expectations on them to finish their work, you do understand where flexibility comes into play, and you're empathetic with their situation. So allow your people to come to you with suggestions. It's very important to figure out what works for them during this time. when I talked about just previously that they do still have some expectations on them, right? They still have to do their job. Be very clear about what the new expectations are. They might be the same as before, but now the expectation will be, how are you going to get there? Let's talk through those expectations, okay? As well, sometimes when people are forced to work from home, you have to develop new policies if you haven't had those before, just so people are clear on, what their expectations are, how they can achieve those goals from a whole new dynamic of work. And then ensure your employees are fully understanding what the expectations are from the start. Don't, try and change it 6 months down the road. Make sure from the beginning they're aware of what their hours of work are and how flexible you are in those. Tasks to be completed, as well as timelines, flexibility on schedule, but also what happens if the work's not accomplished. So, I'm working from home, I'm going through the same things as everybody else during a pandemic. I'm still trying to finish my work on time. So if I'm not going to do that, or I'm not doing delivering quality work, what happens in that regard? Just so that people are aware that there are consequences. Even though we are in a pandemic, you still have to finish your work. Setting goals for people. So both people that are in person working as well as remote, individual goals, team goals, company goals, and how do they all fit together? Because I think right now people might be feeling dislocated from their work. And so that's how we try and get them engaged again. Make sure you're having those constant conversations about those team goals. Adjust goals as needed by your employees. So sometimes, like I said, the flexibility is important in regards to hours of work and those sorts of things. Let's adjust the goals as our people need. And then how do all these goals fit together? With not only you, but the rest of your team. So having these kind of video chats where your teams can connect to make sure they all fit together is really, really wonderful. As well, the last expectation I wanted to talk about is homeschooling. Sometimes parents have to step in and become the teacher. So how flexible are you in the homeschooling hours? And can you work that into the schedule? Let me tell you the stress it will take off your employees if they know they're allowed to take that time and they don't feel like they're supposed to be working during that time. That creates a whole other level of stress. For all of those that are doing it, raise your hand. I know you understand, as do I. So I've been talking about flexibility. So flexibility as a manager, flexibility as employees during this time of change are very important. So again, we've been talking about how do you communicate how flexible you are in regards to hours of work, in regards to if kids pop into the video chats, instead of them being embarrassed, say hello, that kind of stuff. Dogs barking. How flexible are you with people using their video versus non-video chats? Let's make sure that you're clear on whether or not you want them to. And do they have to do their hair every day? That's what they want to know. I know that's what I want to know on a regular basis. And then, when we think about expectations of having quiet video chats, that's so February 2020. I don't know about the rest of you, but I do not ever expect to have a quiet video chat these days. And I think it's important to show people that flexibility. Another section with remote work, when we talk about flexibility, is work-life balance. So now that everybody's been pushed into their home office, it's really easy for some people to leave their work mode on 24/7. If we do that, there's going to be a lot of burnout within our teams. So I make sure that when the workday is over, I shut everything off. But I've been working remotely for a long time. So for me, it's easy, but a lot of people have had to teach themselves how to create that work-life balance when they're working from home. So it's really important in the best of times, and it's really important during pandemic times, really important, especially with all the other stressful things going on. So what you can expect from your people is a change in hours or days of work, vacations taken or not taken. All of these things we have to really think about. How is it balanced for our people? And then we want to set timelines and deadlines and then let our people go. So, if they need to work between 7 and 10 at night and they can't work between, noon to 3, there must be a reason for that. So we need to really talk about how can they balance their life to make sure they're still taking care of the things that are primarily important to them. Another thing during work-life balance is definitely don't micromanage your people during this time. If they're having trouble getting things to you, again, make sure you're asking them questions, you're communicating, you're finding out what's going on and help them through it. Don't micromanage. That makes people even more frustrated and full of stress than it would if they weren't being micromanaged and were able to get to that goal at their own time. And then setting hours that work for people and arranging check-in times that work for people is very important. So let's say, as an example, I'm homeschooling and I have to help my child get on at 9 o'clock in the morning. Maybe a check-in meeting on video at 9 in the morning is not useful for me. So maybe 9:30 would be better. So really check into what's working for your people. And throughout this time, I've I've uncovered a whole plethora of technology that's available to us to be able to connect with our people. And so I think when we're talking about technology, it's really important to be open to any types of technology that really, really work for us as a team. And if there's a person who all of a sudden has been thrown into this technology, but they're not really a technological person, maybe we should offer some training on that and have some patience as well, because there's so many things people are going through at the same time. Listen to what your employees suggest would work for them as far as technology. And then there's so many tools. You can use Zoom, Teams, Google Meet, Slack, Zendesk. There's so many, right? So research what works best for you and your teams if you weren't already using one before this. And then I did talk about video already, but I really, really want to point out how important video is. And, as an example, for this presentation today, you're seeing my face. I don't get to see your faces. I would love to. But, you're seeing my face. If you weren't seeing my face and you were just hearing my voice, it's really a lot harder to connect in regards to taking in information and seeing how if I'm happy or if I'm not happy, right? So these are the kinds of things we want to think about when we're doing video chats with people. And so I want you to look at the picture that's on here now. The person second from the top left, their video is turned off. So we want to find out if they're okay, right? So maybe they're turning it off more and more and more often. But if you look through this video chat, it's actually a really good storyline of what's going on in our environment and during the pandemic right now with our remote workplace. So we've got dogs popping in, we've got a kid popping in, right? We've got all of these different things. Some people are inside, some people are outside. So all of these things are now expected and allowed, right? So we've kind of opened our minds to this remote work flexibility, which I really love. So for me, I do feel video is really important because it does help you to stay connected. We can't be together in person, but we can see each other's faces. And I do work with some clients who refuse to turn on their video. And I just say to them, can you just turn it on and say hi to me? I just want to see everybody and make sure you're good. And so they'll pop on, say hi, and they'll pop off. And I'm totally fine with it. I just kind of want to see people's faces and make sure they're doing okay. And, if you don't see their faces, you can't tell if they're stressed out or if they're feeling extremely overwhelmed. And if you realize that they are, maybe you can step in and help or ask if they need some time. Do they need a mental health break? Which sometimes I took that a lot at the beginning, trying to, exercise or do something where I could remove myself from the stress of having to help people go through safety protocols and positive cases and all that kind of stuff. It was very, very stressful for me. So being able to talk on video really helped me to connect with people. Also, the pandemic has forced teams to be really real with one another. So sometimes before, when I would go to client sites, hair, makeup, the whole thing is done, right? On video calls, sometimes my hair is in a bun or it's in a ponytail. And I think these expectations have changed things a little bit because it allows you to be more real with your people, right? So again, no expectations on quiet video calls. I think that's really important. There will be interruptions and we have to learn to be okay with that. Dogs are living their best lives right now because their owners are home, but it's hard to control them from barking. So when you're on video, I want you to look for some red flags. I'm just going to be wrapping this up in a moment. If you're really, really paying attention, you might notice that some people are less happy or they seem less connected. They might be expressing their frustration a little bit more. So make sure you're talking them through this. If, at the beginning they were on video all the time and now for the last 2 or 3 weeks they refuse to turn on video, I think it's really important to think about why this might be happening and maybe reach out to them individually to figure out what's going on. Another thing would be that they're suddenly silent during meetings, whereas before they used to really communicate strongly during meetings, and now they're suddenly silent. So you want to figure out why that would be. Sometimes they're not responding to emails. And especially if they were really quick to respond before this, you really want to check and see if they're okay. There might be a lot of things going on where they just can't keep it together. So make sure you're checking in. Same thing with not answering or screening their calls. Really pay attention to their family situation and see if they're overwhelmed. Do they need a day off? Can you do that? Can you afford for them to take a day off? Just, I've had a lot of managers where I've coached them and said, these people are really overwhelmed. They came to you and told you, but you didn't help them in any way. So they came to me. So what can we do to help them, right? Sometimes one day off, just freebie, if you can do it, is great. Again, family situation is very important. If they're feeling overwhelmed, see what you can do to help. And communicate that you're allowing time for mental health. I think this was a huge one for a lot of my clients, because if they don't allow for mental health and don't communicate that they're allowing for that mental health break, people feel guilty taking a mental health break. And that's kind of the opposite of what we want it to do, especially during a pandemic where there's lots of anxiety and, stressors around other areas. We really want to make sure we're communicating that we are okay if they take a break. Here's my most important tip of the day and how I'm going to round it off for you. And this is something I've realized over the course of the last year, especially. Your employees will remember most the way you treated them during times like this. So at the end of this pandemic, when we do all go back to normal life, whatever that will look like, our people are going to remember, did you treat them well? Were you understanding and flexible? Because if you were, they're going to come back and be even more loyal and thankful to you. If you treat them very rigidly, their chances are they're going to leave when things open up again. So if we want to keep our great employees going, let's use these tips that I talked about today to really connect with our people and make sure they're doing okay. Thank you so much. I appreciate that you guys took the time to listen to me today. If you have questions or comments, reach out and I'll do my best to answer them for you.